Love can be a sanctuary, but sometimes it's a trap. It can be a promise of a shared future or a meticulously planned execution. We tell ourselves that we would do anything for the ones we love, that we would give them our last breath, our last dollar. But what happens when that trust becomes a weapon? What happens when one person's everything is simply another's opportunity? This is the story of a man who gave his heart, his soul, and his entire fortune in a final act of devotion. It's the story of a woman who took it all. And it's the story of the shocking betrayal that followed a single, fatal transaction. Before we log into this tragic tale, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single detail as we unravel this heartbreaking case. The glow of the tablet screen cast a pale, ethereal light on Leo Vance's face, accentuating the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the dark, hollowed-out spaces beneath his eyes. He was a ghost in his own life, a man whose brilliant mind was trapped in a body that was systematically betraying him. The degenerative neurological disease had been swift and merciless, stealing his mobility, his strength, and his future, but it had not touched the core of him, his unwavering, all-consuming love for Isabella. She sat beside him on the edge of the king-sized bed, her hand cool and steady on his. Her presence was the only thing that made the sterile, minimalist penthouse feel like a home. He had designed the apartment himself, a testament to his former life as a celebrated architect with clean lines, vast windows, and a conspicuous absence of personal clutter. He had never cared for things, only for ideas. And then, for her. "Are you sure, my love?" Isabella whispered, her voice a perfect symphony of concern and adoration. Her emerald eyes, the color of a summer forest, were wide and glistening with unshed tears. She was beautiful, breathtakingly so, a vibrant splash of color in his monochrome world. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Leo said, his own voice a raspy echo of what it once was. It took a monumental effort to speak, to force the words past the neurological static. He offered her a weak but genuine smile. This isn't for me anymore. It's for you, for your future, for the art gallery you've always dreamed of. It's my legacy, Bella, and you are my legacy." With a trembling thumb, he navigated the final steps on the banking application. The numbers on the screen were staggering, a lifetime of successful projects, shrewd investments, and careful planning. His entire liquid net worth. He had already signed over the deed to the penthouse. This was the last piece, the final transfer. Recipient: Isabella Dubois. Amount: $4,782,116.38. He tapped the final confirmation button. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen, a silent, digital confirmation that he had just given away his entire world. A profound sense of peace washed over him, eclipsing the constant, gnawing pain. He had done it. He had secured her future. He had provided for the woman who had brought light into his final, dark days. "I love you, Leo," Isabella said, leaning in to kiss his forehead. Her lips were soft, her scent a familiar, intoxicating mix of jasmine and vanilla. She squeezed his hand. "Now let me get your medication. You look tired. You need to rest." He nodded, the effort exhausting him. He closed his eyes, the image of her face, radiant with what he believed was love, burned into his memory. He heard the soft click of the pill bottle, the gentle fizz of the tablet dissolving in a glass of water. She helped him drink, her arm a steady support behind his neck. The bitter taste of the powerful opioid analgesic was familiar. He sank back into the pillows, the tablet with the green checkmark still glowing softly on the nightstand beside him. The last thing he felt was Isabella's hand stroking his hair as the silence, and the darkness, enveloped him completely. Detective Kate Harding stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, her gaze sweeping over the scene with a practiced, dispassionate eye. The penthouse was a cathedral of wealth and quiet taste, but it felt cold, sterile, and profoundly lonely. The body on the bed, already zipped into a bag by the Emmys team, was a stark reminder that money couldn't buy time. Cause of death looks pretty straightforward, her partner, Detective Miller, said, flipping through his notebook. He was a good cop, but he had a tendency to see the simplest narrative first. Leo Vance, 42. Terminal illness, some kind of aggressive neurodegenerative disorder. His sister's on her way. She was his emergency contact. The Emmy is thinking he either succumbed to the illness or, looking at the empty bottle of OxyContin on the nightstand, decided to check out a little early. Said it happens a lot with terminal patients. One last dose to quiet the pain for good. Harding didn't reply. She walked over to the nightstand. There was a glass of water, a copy of a book on ancient Roman architecture, and the tablet, its screen now dark. She tapped it, and it flickered to life, displaying the banking confirmation screen. The time of the transaction was 10:17 p.m. last night. The sister had called for a wellness check this morning when he didn't answer his daily call. $4.7 million, Miller whistled, reading over her shoulder. He gave it all to the girlfriend, Isabella Dubois. Quite a final gesture. Where is she? Harding asked, her voice quiet. That's the thing, Miller said, shrugging. She's not here. No answer on her phone. Her name's on the lease as a cohabitant, but it looks like her stuff is gone. Closet in the guest room is empty. No toiletries in the bathroom. Looks like she packed up and left. So her boyfriend of 2 years, a man who just gave her his entire fortune, dies and she just vanishes. Harding raised an eyebrow. Maybe it was too much for her, Miller offered. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe she couldn't stand to be here. She's probably at a friend's place, curled up in a ball. Harding wasn't convinced. The scene was too neat. The empty pill bottle, the half-full glass of water. Everything pointed to a quiet, tragic end. But the timing of the transfer, followed by the girlfriend's immediate disappearance, was a dissonant note in the sad symphony. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the victim's sister. Sarah Vance was a whirlwind of raw, unvarnished grief and pure, undiluted rage. Her eyes, the same intelligent gray as her brother's, were red-rimmed and blazing. Where is she? Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with fury as she stormed into the apartment, bypassing the uniformed officer at the door. Where is that Black Widow bitch? Ma'am, please calm down, Miller began, but Sarah was a force of nature. Calm down? My brother is dead, and I know who's responsible, she said, her finger jabbing in the direction of the empty guest room. That woman, Isabella, she was a parasite. She latched onto him the moment he got his diagnosis. She played him, told him everything he wanted to hear. I told him. I warned him she was only after his money. But he was so in love, he wouldn't listen. We understand you're upset, Ms. Vance, Harding said, her tone calm and steady, a rock in the emotional storm. But right now, the evidence suggests your brother passed from his illness. Evidence? Sarah let out a bitter, incredulous laugh. You want evidence? Check his bank account. I guarantee you it's empty. She wouldn't have left until she had every last cent. He told me last week he was going to do it, sign everything over to her. He called it a legacy of love. I called it suicide by checkbook. Harding's gaze sharpened. The sister's raw, unfiltered fury was providing the context the crime scene lacked. This wasn't just a grieving girlfriend who had fled. This was an accusation. Later, after Sarah had been gently escorted away and the forensics team was packing up, Harding stood alone in the silent bedroom. She put on a fresh pair of gloves and picked up the water glass from the nightstand. It was pristine. She looked at the empty pill bottle. It was also pristine. There were no fingerprints on either object, except for a single smudged print from Leo Vance on the rim of the glass. Miller, she called out. Did forensics dust the whole room? Yeah, place is clean, he called back from the living room. Just the victim's prints on his personal items. Nothing from the girlfriend anywhere in this room. Looks like she was a neat freak. Harding stared at the glass. A woman who had just helped her dying lover take his final dose of medication. A woman who had supposedly held the glass for him, had somehow managed to leave no trace of her presence. It was impossible. It wasn't just neat. It was surgically clean. She looked at the tablet one last time, at the cold, green checkmark that signified the end of Leo Vance's life savings, and quite possibly his life. Sarah Vance had called her brother's final act a suicide by checkbook. Harding had a sudden, chilling thought that it might have been a homicide by wire transfer. Tatneen Roy. De la fin ban chi tit va mo ron qua chuang tu. Tap trung veo vik fat trien and vat. Dao sao veo bien va nong chow muc du song tang qua kuok dutra. The 24 hours following the discovery of Leo Vance's body were a deep, frustrating dive into a digital and emotional void. The girlfriend, Isabella Dubois, was a ghost in the truest sense of the word. Her cell phone, a top-of-the-line model Leo had undoubtedly purchased, went straight to a crisp, automated message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. Her social media profiles, which Sarah Vance had described with disgust as being meticulously curated galleries of her and Leo's perfect love, had been systematically erased. The accounts still existed, phantom limbs on the social network, but they were wiped clean, scrubbed of all content. There were no photos of romantic trips to Paris, no saccharine posts about caring for a loved one, no friends, no history. It was a professional-level digital scrub, the kind of scorched earth tactic that takes foresight, expertise, and a complete lack of sentimentality. Harding and Miller drove to the address listed on Isabella's driver's license, a trendy, glass-fronted apartment building in the city's arts district. The superintendent, a weary man who had seen it all, confirmed she had moved out 2 days prior to Leo's death. She had paid cash a significant sum to break her lease. She had hired a professional cleaning crew to leave the apartment immaculate. She had left no forwarding address, no final goodbyes. She had simply vanished into the city's vast, uncaring anonymity. The focus of the investigation shifted to the one tangible thing she had left behind: the money. A warrant was fast-tracked through the system with surprising speed, a testament to the Vance family's quiet influence. It granted them access to the recipient account at a boutique private bank. What they found was both exactly what they expected and deeply alarming. The nearly $4.8 million had been deposited at 10:18 p.m. At 10:25 p.m. a mere 7 minutes later, while Leo's body was likely still warm, a series of automated, pre-programmed transfers had been initiated. The money was sliced and diced, sent in complex, cascading transactions to a dozen different accounts at various offshore banks in jurisdictions known for their impenetrable secrecy: the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Singapore. From there, a significant portion was immediately converted into cryptocurrency, primarily Monero, a digital currency prized for its enhanced privacy features. It was a classic high-speed money laundering scheme, executed with a chilling efficiency that screamed of practice and professional design. This was not an amateur's panicked flight. This was the final, flawless step of a well-rehearsed plan. The most compelling part of the investigation, however, was not taking place on a computer screen. It was unfolding in the quiet, sterile interview room at the precinct with Sarah Vance. Her initial storm of grief and rage had subsided, replaced by a cold, focused determination. She became the narrator of her brother's last 2 years, painting a vivid, heartbreaking portrait of a brilliant, gentle man being slowly and deliberately isolated and consumed by a predator. She was a chameleon, Sarah explained, her hands wrapped tightly around a styrofoam cup of coffee she hadn't touched. When she first met him at a gallery opening, she was the struggling artist, the ethereal free spirit who claimed she didn't care about money. She wore bohemian dresses, quoted obscure poetry, and talked about spirituality and energy. Leo was utterly captivated. He'd spent his whole life in a world of logic, blueprints, and right angles, and she was chaos and color. She was everything his structured life wasn't. As Leo's illness progressed, Sarah described with a pained precision how Isabella's persona had shifted. The free spirit was seamlessly replaced by the devoted caretaker, the selfless, Florence Nightingale figure. She managed his appointments, she researched alternative therapies, she administered his medications, she cooked his macrobiotic meals. She also managed his social life, acting as a polite but firm gatekeeper. Old friends from his firm found their calls weren't returned. Family visits were rescheduled at the last minute, then cancelled altogether, always with a plausible, caring excuse. "Leo's having a bad day," she would say, her voice dripping with concern. "He needs his rest." Sarah saw it for what it was. A systematic campaign of isolation, cutting him off from the support network that might have questioned Isabella's motives. "The final straw for me," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a renewed surge of remembered fury, "was about 6 months ago. Years ago, before he was sick, Leo had set up a significant educational trust for my 2 kids. It was his pride and joy. He loved being their cool, rich uncle. Isabella convinced him that the market was too volatile, that the money would be safer if it were actively managed under his main portfolio. She presented him with charts and articles. She helped him dissolve the trust. He transferred the funds, and she promised they would sit down with a lawyer the next week to set up a new, better one. That meeting was never scheduled. She just absorbed it. That's when I knew. She wasn't just going to take what he had now. She was going to take his past and his future, too." While Harding gathered the emotional context, the preliminary forensics report from the scene came back. It was a study in contradictions. The cause of death was officially listed as cardiac arrest due to respiratory failure caused by acute opioid toxicity. The levels of OxyContin in Leo's system were lethal, certainly, but within a range that a terminal patient in extreme pain with a high tolerance might have taken in a moment of despair. The medical examiner, a cautious and experienced professional, couldn't definitively rule it a suicide or an accidental overdose. It was a perfect, ambiguous crime. But there was one more detail, a footnote that the ME had included. The residue in the water glass matched the dissolved pills from Leo's prescription bottle, but a more sensitive spectral analysis had found a trace amount of another compound, diphenhydramine, a common over-the-counter sleep aid. It was a minuscule amount, not enough to be lethal on its own, but enough to suggest that the drink might have been intended to ensure Leo fell asleep quickly and deeply, to make sure he couldn't have second thoughts, couldn't make a last-minute phone call, couldn't change his mind. That night, Harding stood in her office, the city lights twinkling outside her window. A web of connections was forming on the large whiteboard behind her. On one side was Leo, a man who gave everything away. On the other was Isabella, a woman who took everything and then vanished. The running theory in the department was that this was a tragic but ultimately civil matter. A case of a profoundly selfish girlfriend who took the money and ran, while her sick, heartbroken boyfriend chose to end his life. But Harding knew that was too simple. The meticulous digital scrub, the professional-grade money laundering, the trace of a sleep aid in the glass, the systematic isolation of the victim, these were not the actions of a grieving girlfriend, however flawed. These were the calculated, sequential steps of a con artist who had just completed her magnum opus. Isabella Dubois wasn't just a ghost. She was a hunter, and Leo Vance had been her prey. Harding now had to prove that the final, fatal dose wasn't an act of mercy or despair, but the cold, clinical execution of a meticulously planned and flawlessly executed betrayal. Of course, here is a fully detailed and expanded version of Chapter 3, focusing on the intricate process of unmasking the antagonist and the rising stakes of the investigation. The hunt for Isabella Dubois was like hunting a phantom in a house of mirrors. Every lead, every potential clue, seemed to reflect back on the investigators, leading them to dead ends and deliberately erased trails. Harding knew that a ghost built of digital smoke could only be caught by a better ghost. She assigned the financial tracing and digital forensics to the department's cybercrime unit, specifically to a brilliant but iconoclastic analyst named Jenna Ito. Jenna was a former Black Hat hacker who, as a teenager, had successfully breached the Department of Defense network out of intellectual curiosity. The federal government, in a rare moment of foresight, had given her a choice: a decade in a federal prison or a badge. She chose the badge, and she treated cases like this as personal insults, a direct challenge to her digital supremacy. Jenna's workspace was a darkened cave in the corner of the office, illuminated only by the glow of 6 monitors displaying cascading lines of code, satellite maps, and complex financial charts. "This isn't just a disappearing act," Jenna said, her eyes, magnified by thick, neon green glasses, darting across the screens. She never seemed to blink. This is a complete identity purge. The Isabella Dubois persona was created exactly 2 years and 3 months ago. A social security number was issued, a driver's license, a credit history. It's a masterpiece of synthetic identity fraud. It's built from a patchwork of stolen and fabricated data: the social security number of a child who died in the 1980s, the credit history of a dormant account, a Photoshop driver's license. It was all carefully aged online to look legitimate. Whoever she is, she's been planning this specific type of long con for a very long time. While Jenna dove into the digital labyrinth, fighting a war of algorithms and encryption, Harding focused on the physical world Isabella had inhabited. She recanvassed the high-end shops, art galleries, and restaurants Isabella had frequented, showing a clear, high-resolution photo. Most remembered her as the beautiful, devoted, almost saintly girlfriend of the wealthy, ailing architect. They spoke of her quiet grace, her sad eyes, her unwavering dedication. She had played her part to perfection. But one bartender at a 5-star hotel bar, a place known for its discretion and dim lighting, remembered something different. His name was Marco, and he was a student of human nature. He remembered Isabella coming in alone, usually on a Tuesday or Thursday afternoon, when Leo had his physical therapy sessions. She would sit at a secluded table, not the bar. She wouldn't drink alcohol, only sparkling water with lime. She would meet with a man, an older, impeccably dressed man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a slight but distinct European accent. Marco had assumed he was her father or an uncle, but their conversations were quiet, intense, and businesslike. He recalled one snippet of conversation he'd overheard as he refilled their water glasses. The man had called her Chloe and had said, in a low, stern voice, "You are getting too emotionally involved. Remember the protocol. Stick to the plan." The name Chloe was the first real crack in the facade of Isabella Dubois. It was a tangible piece of data in a sea of fabrications. Jenna Ito took the name and ran with it. She cross-referenced it with financial records, known associates of other synthetic identity cases, and law enforcement databases from across the country. After 2 days of relentless, caffeine-fueled work, she got a hit. It wasn't a direct one, but a ghost in the machine. A low-level shell corporation, registered in Delaware and used in the first phase of the money laundering scheme, had a single name on its initial incorporation documents. The name had been scrubbed and replaced within hours of the company's formation, but Jenna, peeling back the layers of the server's revision history, found the original entry, Chloe Martinez. The life of Chloe Martinez was a stark, brutal contrast to the curated elegance of Isabella Dubois. Born into the abject poverty of a rough neighborhood in another state, Chloe had been a ward of the state from the age of 10, after her mother died of an overdose. She bounced between a series of overburdened foster homes, learning from a young age that survival depended on her own wits. Her juvenile record was a sad, predictable litany of petty theft, shoplifting, and low-level credit card fraud. She was a survivor, a street-smart kid who learned early on that the world was a cold, hard place, and the only person she could rely on was herself. At 18, she had aged out of the foster care system and had, for all official purposes, disappeared. Harding dug into Chloe's past, speaking via video call to her last known foster mother and a retired juvenile parole officer. They both painted a picture of a young woman who was remarkably intelligent, unervingly charming, and a pathological liar. She was a mirror, the parole officer said, his voice heavy with the memory. She had a genius for reading people, for finding their weaknesses, their vanities, their deepest desires, and mirroring them back. She became whatever you wanted her to be. To a lonely foster mother, she was the dutiful daughter. To a Mark, she would be the perfect partner. He also noted that she showed a distinct lack of empathy, a cold, calculating core beneath the charming exterior. They also found a pattern. In the years after she disappeared from the system, police reports from 2 different states showed a similar MO. A charming, beautiful young woman would target lonely, vulnerable, moderately wealthy men. She would enter into a whirlwind romance, gain their absolute trust and access to their finances, and then, after a few months, drain their bank accounts and vanish, leaving behind a broken heart and a financial wreck. But Leo Vance was different. The scale was grander, the performance was longer, the betrayal was absolute, and the outcome was fatal. This wasn't just another con. This was her masterpiece. The final, crucial piece of the puzzle came from the full toxicology report from the medical examiner's office. They had completed a more detailed analysis, using gas chromatography to break down the specific chemical metabolites of the drugs in Leo's system. The report was definitive. The lethal dose of OxyContin was from his own prescription, a bottle with his name on it. But the diphenhydramine sleep aid found in the water glass was a specific, fast-dissolving formulation, a brand that came in tablet form. And in Leo Vance's meticulously organized medicine cabinet, a cabinet that contained every prescription and supplement he took, there was no sign of that brand. He had never been prescribed it. He had never purchased it. It was a foreign element, introduced into the scene by an outside party. This changed everything. It was the physical evidence Harding had desperately needed. The sleep aid was the murder weapon, just as deadly as a gun or a knife, but silent, subtle, and almost untraceable. She now had proof of a foreign agent introduced by a third party. She could officially reclassify the case from a suspicious death to a homicide. The hunt for a selfish, runaway girlfriend was now a manhunt for a meticulous and cold-blooded killer. And thanks to Jenna, they now had her real name. The ghost now had a face, transformed from a passive forensic analysis into an active, aggressive manhunt. A warrant was issued for the arrest of Chloe Martinez, aka Isabella Dubois, for murder. Her face was splashed across the news, the shocking story of the Black Widow of the penthouse becoming a media sensation. Jenna Ito worked relentlessly, following the chaotic, branching paths of the laundered money. It was a global game of digital whack-a-mole. As soon as she got close to a cache of money in a bank in the Cayman Islands, it would vanish, converted into Monero, an untraceable cryptocurrency, and then reappear in a different form in Singapore. Chloe was smart and she was fast, but she had made one small mistake. In the frantic hours after the transfer, a single transaction, a relatively small transfer of $20,000, had been sent not to an anonymous crypto wallet, but to a traditional bank account in Miami under the name Jessica Price. The account had been opened 2 months prior with a high-quality fake ID. It was a seed account, a small nest egg she had set up for her new life, a crucial error made before her main laundering scheme was fully operational. Harding and Miller were on the next flight to Miami. The city was a perfect hiding place for someone like Clea Transient, sun-drenched metropolis full of people trying to escape their pasts and reinvent themselves. They traced the Jessica Price identity. She had used the account to put a deposit down on a luxury condo overlooking the ocean and to purchase a brand new white convertible. Chloe wasn't hiding in a shack, living in fear. She was living the life Leo's money had bought her, a life of sun, sand, and opulent freedom. They set up surveillance on the condo. For 2 days they watched. They saw her Chloe, now with platinum blonde hair and a deep tan, living a life of carefree leisure. She went to the beach, she shopped at designer boutiques, she dined at expensive restaurants. She was a woman without a care in the world, a woman who had successfully shed her past like a snake sheds its skin. There was no sign of remorse, no hint of fear. The plan was to arrest her quietly, to avoid a public scene. But Chloe was a survivor, and survivors are paranoid. As Harding and Miller, along with local Miami police, moved in to make the arrest in the condo's private parking garage, she spotted them. A flicker of movement in her rearview mirror, a face that didn't belong. The mask of Jessica Price dropped, replaced by the hard, cold eyes of Chloe Martinez. She slammed the convertible into reverse, the tires squealing, and rammed a police cruiser, creating a gap. Then she gunned the engine, leading them on a high-speed chase through the streets of Miami. It was a desperate, reckless flight. She drove with a skill and a ruthlessness that shocked the pursuing officers, weaving through traffic, running red lights. But her luck ran out. A tourist bus, making a wide turn, blocked her path. She was trapped. Harding approached the convertible, her weapon drawn. Chloe sat behind the wheel, her hands gripping it tightly. Her face was a mask of pure, defiant rage. There were no tears, no pleas for mercy. "You have no proof," she spat, her voice cold and steady, even as half a dozen police weapons were aimed at her. "He gave me that money. It was a gift. He was a sad, dying man, and he killed himself. You can't prove anything else." The confrontation in the Miami Sun was not the end of the investigation, but the beginning of a new, psychological war. Chloe was defiant, confident that the ambiguity of the crime scene was her ultimate protection. She believed she had committed the perfect murder, a crime of omission and suggestion, a death that would forever be shrouded in the reasonable doubt of a suicide. Harding knew that getting a murder conviction would be an uphill battle. She needed more than the sleep aid and the laundered money. She needed to find a voice for her victim. She needed to let Leo Vance speak for himself, from beyond the grave. Chloe Martinez was extradited, her trial becoming a media circus. In the courtroom, she was a masterful performer. She transformed from the defiant fugitive back into the grieving lover, Isabella Dubois. Her defense attorney painted a tragic picture of a devoted woman who had cared for a terminally ill man, a man who had, in a final act of love, gifted her his fortune before succumbing to despair and ending his own life. The prosecution, led by a determined DA working closely with Harding, presented the evidence: the synthetic identity, the systematic isolation, the immediate money laundering, the foreign sleep aid. But the defense had an answer for everything. The fake identity was to protect her from a past abuser. The money laundering was the advice of a shady financial advisor. The sleep aid? They argued Leo could have gotten it from anyone, anywhere. Doubt was their greatest weapon, and they wielded it with surgical precision. Harding watched the trial, a cold frustration growing inside her. She was sure of Chloe's guilt, but she could see the jury, their faces a mixture of confusion and sympathy for the beautiful, weeping woman on the stand. She knew they needed more. She and Jenna Ito went back to the beginning. They initiated a deep-level forensic recovery of every device Leo Vance had ever owned: old laptops, previous phones, external hard drives. They were looking for something he had hidden, a final message. For weeks, they found nothing but architectural drawings and old emails. Then Jenna found it. It wasn't a document or a video. It was hidden in the source code of a personal software project Leo had been working on, a passion project to design a virtual museum. Embedded in the millions of lines of code, encrypted and hidden as comment tags, was a journal. It was Leo's final testament. In the last few weeks of his life, his brilliant, analytical mind had begun to see through the fog of his love. He had started to notice the small inconsistencies, the subtle lies. He wrote about his growing unease, his fear that Isabella's love was a performance. He documented how she had subtly started managing his medication, asking very specific clinical questions about his dosage, about the lethal limits, all under the guise of making sure he was safe. The final entry, dated the day before his death, was a heartbreaking mix of love and terror. "I am a fool," he wrote. "I have built my entire world on a foundation of sand, and the tide is coming in. I see it now. The way she looks at my bank statements, not at me. I have given her everything, and I fear she now sees me as the last, final obstacle. She asked me again tonight about my dosage. She wants to know how much is too much. I pray I am wrong. I love her so much that I am willing to be wrong. But if I am not, then this is goodbye." It was the smoking gun. It was Leo's voice, reaching out from the grave. The DA presented the journal in court. As Leo's final, terrified words were read aloud, the courtroom fell silent. Chloe Martinez's perfect composure finally shattered. The mask of Isabella Dubois melted away, revealing the cold, hard face of a cornered predator. The jury didn't need to deliberate for long. They couldn't convict her of first-degree murder. The proof of her administering the dose was still circumstantial. But they found her guilty of manslaughter by gross negligence, and of dozens of counts of fraud and theft. She was sentenced to the maximum possible term, a life effectively spent behind bars. In the end, Harding stood with Sarah Vance on the balcony of the penthouse, which was now empty and being prepared for sale. They looked out at the city lights, the same view Leo had looked at in his final days. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. "You gave him his voice back." Harding nodded. She knew that Chloe Martinez hadn't just stolen Leo's money. She had tried to steal his truth, to rewrite the story of his life as a sad, pathetic end. But in his final days, the architect had designed one last, perfect structure. A digital fortress to house his own testimony, ensuring that the final chapter of his story would be one not of betrayal, but of justice.